He is the host of the NBA podcast. He is also the quality editor for Bleacher Report, and he's a senior contributor for Forbes Sports. We now welcome Bryan Toporek onto Hoopsology. How's it going, Bryan?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, Bryan, a lot to discuss with you. We're at the half point of the season. And I just want to ask you just a general question. Normally, this is going to be a kind of a basic thing to ask, but under the circumstances, I find it appropriate. What do you just think of the season so far, just considering, limited to no fans, limited access to players, just games being canceled because of COVID? What's been your impressions of the season so far in the NBA?
Yeah, it's hopefully we'll never have to repeat a season like this again. That would be my first take. I think the NFL and MLB made it pretty clear last year that sports were going to come back one way or the other. I think the NBA, with their protocols, is doing the best they can. Nothing's perfect. We've seen some pretty substantive outbreaks with a couple teams. And that's just the cost of business. And both the players and the league signed off on that coming into the season. They knew it was not going to be like the bubble where, after that intro period, no one tested positive and they didn't have to really worry about that. They're in the real world now. They're playing in their own arenas. They have freedom, at least at home, to move around when they aren't playing. So, I think the NBA has done the best it can. I think some of the early contact tracing issues were kind of a learning experience. So I think things have gotten better over time. We've seen, with the road games in particular, players are a lot more restricted now than they were at the beginning of the season in terms of they just can't leave their hotels at all, basically. I think the NBA is just trying to do right by its players, but also prioritizing, we've got to get 70 games in for every team. We've lost a ton of money this year in terms of not being able to have, a lot of teams are starting to have fans back, but still limited capacity. So they've lost a lot of revenue. They're just trying to generate as much money as they can. So it's a tricky balance. And I don't envy Adam Silver and Michelle Roberts, the head of the Players Union, for trying to figure out how to, maximize revenue, but also keep players safe.
What things do you think the NBA can implement from this tricky time once the pandemic is over? So basically what I'm asking is, do you think any positives came from this that can be applied for future NBA seasons? Or do you think it's pretty much been negative?
No, it's a great question. Selfishly, just from my own perspective, I hope the Zoom press conferences are here to stay. I know a lot of the local beat writers probably do not feel that way because you get a lot of access from the locker room, being able to go up to players and be able to talk to anyone, just not, the two or three guys that they select for these post-game pressers. But, I live in a market where there isn't an NBA team. So it's actually given me an opportunity. I'm a Philly guy, so I cover the Sixers mostly. But I live in Baltimore, so it's given me a chance to sit in on Doc Rivers press conferences, even though I'm 100 miles away from Philly. So I hope those stick. I'm not sure if it will or not. I don't think the league is thinking that far ahead. But then looking ahead to All-Star Game, they're putting everything together on one night instead of having Rising Stars Challenge on Friday, Slam Dunk 3-point on Saturday, All-Star Game Sunday. I'm curious to see how it does ratings-wise, because I could see maybe just, doing this moving forward and having this be the standard thing. All-Star Weekend is usually jam-packed for these guys, and they often say, it's not really a break for them like it is for all the other players. I don't know that would make it different, even if it's, everything's in one night, because they still go to the city. They have, sponsor events, parties, whatever the case may be. But at least, all of their commitments from an on-court perspective would be limited to one night. So that's another thing they could consider, and we'll see how the ratings do. I also like the home and the 2 games home set and road set. I'm sure the players probably don't like it as much now that they're stuck in their hotel room for 3 days, but assuming we don't have that next year, still just cutting down on travel, I think could be a valuable experience throughout the regular season. If you're playing, the same team 4 times in the season, does it make sense to have to travel to their market twice in a given year, or does it make sense to just pack both of those visits in? The counterpoint would be if, it's important for seeding and your star player is out for those 2 games. Is that fair? Yeah. So again, this, a lot of things the NBA has to balance in terms of variables, but I think there could be some silver linings from this season. Yeah.
To your point with the Zoom press conferences, I've interviewed a couple of journalists. They think the exact same way. They're actually for that. And you brought up this All-Star Weekend. That's something I wanted to talk to you about. This, I guess, single day of all the events. And I guess looking at all the participants through slam dunk, the 3-point, the skills challenge, I would say especially the slam dunk contest, pretty disappointed with the field overall. Was this maybe a time to even experiment with just the format of the dunk contest? I've seen different suggestions of including, I guess, famous dunkers that are not in the NBA to compete with NBA dunkers, or do something funky and different with the dunk contest we haven't seen before. Was this a missed opportunity to maybe do something extra? Or do you think it should just remain how it is no matter what?
No, I think the NBA has made clear with All-Star Weekend they're willing to experiment. We saw it with the main game last year with the Elam ending and the target scores in the quarters, or like the every quarter score goes to a charity. So, I don't think the NBA is so stuck in its ways. It's like, no, this format is perfect. We can't improve on it. It's a fair question about the dunk contest in particular, because I feel like we ask ourselves this question pretty much every year. I mean, there have been a couple exceptions in recent years that, like Aaron Gordon and Zach LaVine, that was a great year. But it's always like, why aren't we getting the star players to participate? Like, why can't we get a Zion Williamson or LeBron James to participate in this event? And if we can't, cool. It's a nice way for Cassius Stanley to make a name for himself, for fans who haven't heard of him yet. That's great. Anthony Simons should be fun as well. But yeah, I mean, I think the NBA should be open. If this trend continues beyond this year, I mean, I'm not going to begrudge anyone for, who wasn't already going to the game. I'm not going to begrudge them for not wanting to travel to All-Star Weekend, where again, you're like, you get there, I think it's Saturday at 7 p.m., you're locked in the hotel. They're basically creating a one-day bubble. So that doesn't sound fun. But if we go to next year and we're still finding like none of these big name guys want to participate, I think the NBA absolutely should be willing to experiment with the format.
And this year, we continue to see, Team LeBron versus Team Durant, just the players picking the players on their teams. What do you think about that? Them doing a special on TNT? Are you a fan of that format, or do you think maybe they should go back to East versus West?
I like the format, honestly. I think getting to see teammates play against each other is cool. I think, the drama from this year where the 2 Jazz players got picked last is just hilarious.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's a cool way for these guys to get to play with people that they might otherwise not get to play with. And I think, you look at the rosters for both of these teams, and it's like, as the LeBron and KD draft was going on at first, I'm thinking like, LeBron is just crushing KD here. KD had to pick Kyrie, of course, so LeBron gets Giannis and Steph, and it's like, okay, good luck beating that trio. But then as you go down the list, KD's just got a ton of ridiculous high-level scorers. So we'll see what happens in this game, but I'm excited. I think this should be a genuinely good All-Star game.
I hope so. It just seems the enthusiasm has been kind of off. So I guess my concern is this: the players not taking it super serious. I mean, there's always been a debate the players taking the game serious anyways, and without a pandemic. And now is a situation in which even LeBron and some other players expressed, their hesitancy to participate. So I just hopefully they change their minds and they just get motivated the day of the games. But I'm just worried it's just going to be a colossal blowout by halftime, and when the third quarter rolls around, it's not going to be watchable television. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm incorrect, but I hope that they kind of come to their senses and get motivated during the game. I want to talk to you about the Sixers. They are a fascinating team, and I've asked a lot of our guests this, particularly about Ben Simmons. And I want you to walk me through what you think of him as a superstar player in this league and a player that can help a team win the title. So I guess in a sense be either the first or second option on that team instead of like a third option or a role player. What are your impressions of Ben Simmons overall? Because I've heard things from he's the next LeBron James to he's way overrated. And I just want to get you cover this team, day to day. You know it inside and out. So what do you think of Ben Simmons? And is this a transformative season for the Sixers to become a perennial Eastern Conference power? I realize this in the past season, the Sixers have always been at the top of the standings with ever since they've drafted Embiid. But I feel like this season's different. I feel like they look like a contender to win the titles. So I guess what are your impressions of Ben Simmons specifically to, I guess, their chances of winning the championship and in future years as well?
Yeah, so I fall in the middle of that, of the two camps that you mentioned. But
gotcha.
I don't think he is the next LeBron James. He's just not that type of a scorer. I don't think, the jump shot might develop over time. It looks good in practice and warm-ups, but LeBron was a much more high-level scorer when he came into the league. So I think that, you got to think of him more as like a Magic Johnson than a LeBron James if we're going for ceiling comparisons here. Sure. Doc Rivers just raves about this guy. Like, he absolutely loves Ben Simmons, and I think he is very relieved that Daryl Morey did not trade him when the James Harden stuff came up earlier this season. Yeah. I asked Doc on Wednesday because I was just writing a piece about Ben Simmons Defensive Player of the Year case, and I was asking, they were playing the Jazz, so I'm saying, you're going against Rudy Gobert. The odds have him as the favorite right now. Where do you see Ben stacking up in that race, and Joel as well? And he made it sound, he's like, look, Joel's having a great defensive season, but it should be Ben Simmons and Rudy Gobert, top 2 Defensive Player of the Year. And I don't have Ben Simmons second. He thinks that highly of Ben. And he just keeps hammering home the versatility of Ben, where you can put him on, he's one of the rare players in the league who can legit guard 1 through 5. Now, some smaller, speedy guards still give him trouble. I'm not going to say he is an elite on-ball stopper for someone like a De'Aaron Fox. Devin Booker lit him up earlier this year. But then you go look at the game they played a couple weeks ago against Dallas, and he just harassed Luka Doncic like I don't think I've ever seen someone do before. So I think, for Ben, he's never just going to be that 25-point-per-game conventional superstar. Like, Zach LaVine, I feel like, fits more of the mold of, like, this guy can just be, 30 points a game. Great. Ben, his impact is going to be more subtle. He is more in the Draymond Green role of, like, if you really pay attention to this guy, there's a lot to like about him. But because he refuses to take a jump shot or, just isn't willing to take very many of them, those flaws do become pronounced. And I'm curious to see what happens in the playoffs this year, because offensively, Ben has taken some steps forward, even from the start of the year to now. He's been working with Sam Cassell a lot, one of his assistant coaches for the Sixers, and he's been saying Sam is really riding him in terms of cutting down on turnovers, but then also just being aggressive, especially in half-court settings. We haven't really seen a ton of Ben creating shots for himself in half-court settings. I've noticed they're setting screens higher to get him downhill more easily. And recently he's been much more effective in the post. He has this little hook shot that he's going to on either hand where he can post a guy up and then get close to the basket. And it's becoming a higher percentage shot. So is he going to create spacing for Joel Embiid? No, not anytime soon. But if he figures out ways to continue being effective, transition, of course, he's lightning quick, and it's hard to stop a 6'10" freight train, as LeBron James has proven over the years.
Sure.
But in the half-court setting, that's always been the concern. How do teams guard him, especially in the playoffs? This year in particular, it really feels like he's starting to figure some things out on that end. So combine that with the defense, and I think the Sixers are really making strides in terms of figuring out how to make Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons work long-term.
So in saying that, when we hit playoff time, Brooklyn's been determined the favorites to win it all. How do you see that matchup going if they are deciding, okay, who is the representative out of the East? It's because, Brooklyn has their own flaws too, in particular with inside the paint. So I guess with both teams having really some flaws, who do you see coming out as the victor if they do, in fact, end up meeting in the Eastern Conference Finals?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think the trade deadline will be very instructive in that regard. The Sixers have been mentioned and Kyle Lowry rumors, but then some also smaller like PJ Tucker. There was just something out today about they might want Larry Nance. I think George Hill would make a lot of sense for them. And, the Nets, it sounds like they're in the front seat for getting Blake Griffin, who the Pistons just bought out. So I don't think either team is a finished product right now. But if we're talking just rosters today, who would win? I would take Brooklyn. I think we are underrating. We are collectively focused too much on their defensive flaws, which they've actually improved upon since Harden came. They've gotten better on that end of the floor in the last couple weeks. But just having those three high-level isolation scorers late in games, I think it's going to be really, really hard to shut all three of them down. And to, if James Harden's having an off night, okay, you have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and vice versa. So, the Sixers will have Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. I guess Matisse Thybulle can come out or Danny Green, but I don't think they match up especially well in terms of can we shut all three of these guys down. Kyrie is probably the most concerning from that perspective, just because again they don't really have that on-ball stopper, point of attack on-ball stopper. I think Kyrie could really light him up. So Embiid, you said it. The Nets do have some concerns defensively in the paint, but Embiid will need to score at least 40 for them to have a realistic chance.
What has surprised you this season so far? Because I'm looking at the East and I can't really get a good beat on what's going on.
Yeah.
Just full disclosure, I'm a Bulls fan, and It's just one time, 1 week I see the Bulls are the 5th seed, and then now they're the 9th seed, and it's just, and I know they're a pretty mediocre team. I have no hopes of them doing anything if they have somehow get into the playoffs. But it's just weird just to see a team like the Celtics, where I thought they're going to be a national contender this season. They have the 4th seed now, and the Knicks are just at their tails. And then we see the Heat with Jimmy Butler back, and they're surging. So what do you make of kind of, I guess, anything that surprised you, or teams that are, I guess, in the playoff mix now? Do you see them staying there, or do you think the focus should primarily be on just the 1 to maybe 3 seeds, and the play-in games would just be kind of for fun, but it shouldn't be taken seriously in terms of them making any noise long-term in the playoffs?
Yeah, so I think the biggest surprise probably has to be the Knicks being as competitive as they are. I just don't think anyone realistically thought of them as a potential playoff team, or being, at the half-season mark, being the number 5 seed. That did not see that in the cards for them, and it's a testament to Tibbs, obviously. Julius Randle's had a great all-star season. RJ Barrett's taken some big steps forward in year 2 as well. So I'd say that's probably the surprise of the season so far. Boston, I think it's getting a little overblown, the concerns. I saw some tweets when they were in that losing streak where it's has their window already closed? And it's no, Jason Tatum's 23, Jaylen Brown's 24. Marcus Smart has been out the last couple weeks, and he's so important to this team. Kemba's coming back from the knee injury and just hasn't really looked like himself. So, looking forward, if Kemba Walker, if this diminished version of him is here to stay, then yes, that is concerning, and it will limit their championship upside. But I think, they've got that giant trade exception. We'll see what they do in the next couple weeks. I'm not ruling out Boston as a possible representative of the Eastern Conference and the finals, or just the Eastern Conference finals. Miami just got wrecked by COVID earlier this year, but as you said, they've really, really come on strong late. So I actually don't think in the East, either conference. I don't think the play-in tournament is just don't really pay attention to it, because I was thinking one of these 7 teams will be in the play-in tournament of the Sixers, the Nets, the Bucks, the Celtics, the Heat, the Raptors, the Pacers. And, the Pacers might not sound scary, but if Karis LeVert, it sounds like he's going to come back at some point in the second half. If TJ Warren is back as well, I wouldn't want to draw that Pacers team in a 2-7 first round series. It's just a lot of talent on that roster. So yeah, do I think any of the teams in the play-in mix will represent their team or their conference in the finals? Probably not. I think there are some clear favorites in both conferences at this point, but could they pull a first round upset? Absolutely.
And with the West, I think that one of the biggest shock is the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah.
What do you make of them? I mean, they're the second seed now. I mean, they got the better record than the Lakers, and with Anthony Davis being out with injury, that I guess lead over the second to third seed could widen just depending on how things turn out. How do you see the Suns, I guess, progressing through the playoffs? Is this one of those things where it's just going to be, a lovely story for this season, or do you think it's a preview for years to come where they are a perennial top team in the West?
No, I think. Well, I mean, if Chris Paul continues aging gracefully, I think this is a thing that could have stay for the next couple of years at least. But I was a big buyer in the Suns, even dating back to the offseason. Monty Williams was my preseason pick for Coach of the Year because I actually thought, did I think they'd be the number 2 seed at halfway? No, I thought 4 or 5 seed most likely. But adding Chris Paul to that team after what they did in the bubble last year, you could see the momentum was starting to build for them already. Mikal Bridges has taken a huge leap forward this year. Getting Dario Saric back, he missed some time early in the year. He's just been a perfect backup 5 for them. Even their, with getting guys like Campaign and Langston Galloway, like some of the Jay Crowder as well, some of these guys who aren't like super sexy additions, but they just rounded out the depth really well. The pieces of this team just fit together so well. And, early in the season, it was the bench really carrying them as Booker and CP3 and Ayton were trying to feel each other out. It seems like CP3 and Booker in particular have really figured out each other's rhythm. And, now Booker is back to just being the Devin Booker of old that we didn't see as much in the early weeks. So, yeah, I think this Suns team is legit. I think they could easily win a first round series. Would I pick them over Utah, Clippers, Lakers in the second round? I don't know. We'll see who's healthy at the end of the year, but I don't think this is just like a regular season mirage. I think they are a genuinely very good team.
And last question for you, just kind of typical around this time, is the MVP. Which players have stood out to you? I mean, the usual suspects is LeBron, and I would say Durant was looking that way just before he got sidelined there. But is there anybody else that's really surprising you? I know Joel Embiid is high in the discussion. Is anybody else that might be a dark horse that people aren't really discussing that could be in the mix by the time voting comes around, or do you think it's going to come down to Embiid and LeBron?
So we actually just recorded an episode of our podcast earlier today with our midseason award picks. So full disclosure, if the season ended today, I would pick Embiid. But I said on the episode as well, if I was placing a bet on someone, it would be Nikola Jokic right now.
Oh, wow.
Because he is third in terms of, most sports books have LeBron and Embiid either tied or Embiid slightly ahead, and Jokic is like plus 400, plus 450, something like that. Jokic, in terms of just what he's doing statistically, has definitely a better case than LeBron. He's neck and neck with Embiid. I think, Embiid's case is they're the number 1 seed in the East. Jokic is 6, or the Nuggets are 6 in the West. I think the Nuggets are going to move up. I don't know how high, but, they've really seemed to get their season back on track, I'll say, after some early bumps in the road. I believe their second half of the season schedule is not overly daunting. So if they can move up to the 2, 3, 4 seed range, I think you take that away from Embiid, especially if the Sixers fall back and the Nets and the Bucks jump them in the standings. I also think Giannis is another guy who he's not going to win it, I don't think, because of he won the last 2 years, and voters are going to hold the Bucks playoff failings against him, even though that's not really fair. But that's, I could already just get that sense from a lot of the national voters. It's like, you just have to prove yourself in the playoffs before we're going to give you 3 straight MVP awards. But if you look at what he's doing statistically, he's right in line with what he's done the past 2 years as well. So remove narrative from the equation, and Giannis would be right in that mix as well. But yeah, if I had to pick right now, Embiid or Jokic, 1 and 2. I don't think LeBron should be above Jokic in this discussion.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that the Nuggets are just a hard team to get a beat on. I personally thought Jamal Murray's going to make such a bigger jump. I mean, I was fully on the bandwagon when he was in the bubble.
Mhm.
I totally bought it, and we just haven't seen that materialize all the way yet. But you're right about Jokic. Like, I think the Joker's been amazing, but I think the record's going to really be a huge determining factor if he's going to be in that top discussion or not. But I've always liked his game, and I'm wondering too, just coming to my mind about Luka. And I know with the Dallas Mavericks, you mentioned the trade deadline. It seems like they're poised to make a move with Porzingis because I just think at this point, Luka, it's very clear he's a transformative player in this league, and I just feel like with the Mavericks at this point, they just have to do something, whether it's at the trade deadline or in the offseason. What do you think? What are their chances? They're the 8th seed now. They're 2 games above 500. Luka's kind of in that MVP discussion in terms of kind of not as a serious contender, but certainly his name's been brought up in some media outlets. What do you make of the Mavericks in terms of their trade deadline, I guess, chances or what they're going to do?
Yeah, it's a good question because Luka, my pod co-host, and I both had Luka as our preseason MVP, and that has not aged as well as we would have liked. I mean, as you said, individually he is playing at an MVP level. It's just the rest of the team has not followed suit. I mean, they're another team that COVID hit them hard, so that's part of it. Porzingis missed a lot of time early in the season with the knee injury. Is now coming back slowly. He seems to be rounding back into form, and I know Jake Fisher of Bleacher Report was the one who first broke this rumor that the Mavs are shopping Porzingis. Mark Cuban denied it, but then Mark Spears of The Undefeated confirmed it. So I think it's legit. I think they're at least listening to calls on him. I think it would be a sell low moment, and I don't think they're willing to do that. Like if a team came and offered 3 picks and 2 pick swaps and a good young player for Kristaps Porzingis, the Mavericks will run to the phone to call Adam Silver to confirm that trade. But I don't think they're going to get that type of value for him. I don't think they'll get the value that is commensurate with his upside. So I would be surprised if they move him by the trade deadline. I could be totally off base here, but I think, based on some of the local reporters out of Dallas, it seems like they expected him to start slow, and they're kind of ramping him up gradually so he's really ready to hit his stride April, May once the playoffs roll around. But yeah, they're an interesting team to watch at the deadline because you got Tim Hardaway Jr., who is playing well for them off the bench, but I believe he's an expiring contract, so they could get frisky there if a bigger salary is on the move. And, Jalen Brunson's been playing really well. So I actually like some of the complimentary guys that they have. They'll be an interesting team to watch for sure. They'll be busy.
Well, Bryan, thanks for joining me on the eve of the All-Star game. Just a weird time, except we're focusing on the All-Star Weekend, but it was awesome just picking your brain about we're at the half point of this season. Please plug where our listeners and viewers can find you on social media and your podcast and anything else that you're working on this year.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Happy to come on anytime. You can find me on Twitter at BTOPOREK. You can find my podcast, the NBA podcast, wherever podcasts are found. I just wrote a thing about Ben Simmons' DPOY case at Fansided, so check that out. And I cover the Sixers and salary cap stuff at Forbes. So really bad timing on my part that I'm having a baby in about 2 weeks. So right before
congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, terrible timing for the trade deadline. But I'll have some pre-deadline coverage. I can't promise a ton of post-deadline coverage. Definitely some pre-deadline coverage coming out this upcoming week.
Gotcha. Thanks, Bryan, for joining the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.